When I walked into to NBC Stanford this morning with my new aerodynamic cut, walked in and see all the televisions.
Walking briskly.
Yes, and you see all the televisions as you come in. I see
sir.
you on the television, on Dan Patrick, screaming, just screaming and pontificating, waving your arms.
Also in different clothes.
On our show.
Yeah, different clothes. Well, I dressed down for us.
Absolutely.
I dressed up for DP. Really enjoyed the show. I was screaming because he was just like, he's like, I kind of think Michael Thomas could be a thing this year. I'm like, no! You listen to Jay Croucher?
Fantasy Football Happy Hour with Matthew Berry, served by Applebee's.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Happy Hour. It's wide receiver day. I'm Connor Rogers alongside Matthew Berry, Jay Croucher. Holding on to the Michael Thomas hope still, Jay Croucher?
No, I'm completely off it.
You know what's
you're going to bully you into hope.
No, you know what's great? I have to tell you, this is so great. So Jay, who actually has been defending Michael Thomas for so long.
Literally months.
He's like the only guy. Yeah. And he then eventually comes around to like, you know what, Michael was an amazing player, awesome, but it just, you know, injuries have caught up to him. He's finally come around to what you and I have been saying for a long, long time. But because that clip went out, now people are tagging Michael Thomas on Twitter. And he's getting all the hate for like, how dare you hate Michael Thomas? Where like you're the only guy that's actually been defending him for so long.
Well, the beauty of this is the way I've played it. I've just received hate on both ends of the spectrum. When I liked him, I was ridiculed. And now when I don't like him, I'm also ridiculed. And there's like a 12% chance Michael Thomas is going to tweet at me now. Because so many people are tagging me and Michael Thomas together.
And
like this Australian bloke hates you.
And Michael Thomas, yes, this is true. And Michael Thomas is one of those guys that does read Twitter.
He will respond.
He will absolutely do. He has done this before. Like he is blocked. I've seen him block like other fantasy analysts, other NFL, personalities when they have said something somewhat negative. You know, like I remember I tweeted something very positive about him. How ridiculous his season was or something like that. And I think like he liked it or retweeted it or something like that. So anyway, I think the important part here is that everyone on Twitter who can't agree about anything, they all hate Jay for his Michael Thomas take.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter which Michael Thomas take it is.
The Michael Thomas supporters are trying so hard for him to see you leaving the Michael Thomas bandwagon, while everyone else in the fantasy community was begging you to stop hyping him up.
Yes, correct.
So, sorry.
Well done, Twitter or X.
Great job. All right.
Well done.
As we said, it is wide receiver day here. We got our wide receiver primer. We're going to go through tiers. We're going to go through draft strategy and obviously how to attack it for your roster. But before we do, get the Roto World Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Go to NBCSports.com/draft guide and use promo code BERRY20 for 20% off at checkout. As always, you could use J10 if you are a Michael Thomas fan, although I don't know anymore, or Connor 5. Let's jump right into it here, fellas. Listen, let's go into Tier 1 because obviously a lot of round 1 wide receivers this year, especially as zero running back continues to grow in popularity. I think the question with this tier, Barry, as we pull it up here, is basically how many wide receivers are you comfortable taking in the first round? We know Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase are the headliners, but how about when it turns to Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, and even maybe Amon-Ra St. Brown?
Yeah, I mean, I have all of them. So based on my rankings, the guys that I'm willing to take in the first round are 6 wide receivers. Justin Jefferson, obviously, proud FantasyLife.com investor Jamar Chase, a little Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, ride or die Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Adams, and CeeDee Lamb. 8s, as I call them. Only I call them that. Me and 8s. Those are the guys. But honestly, like there are other guys that like if you drafted Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave at the end of a 12 the end of a first round in a 12-team league, I'm not looking at you going like, what were you thinking with those guys? Like, you know what I mean? Like they're, but for me, those are the 6 that I think I feel comfortable taking in the first round. But I mean, 6 is a lot and more than most years.
Kupp, I think, is the strangest one in a lot of ways because he was the #1 wide receiver last year on a points-per-game basis, and he's coming off his last full healthy season in 2021, which was arguably the greatest wide receiver season of all time. He's 30, so he's getting a little bit older, but still should be young enough. And he's not super reliant on leaping ability or outrageous speed. But at the same time, there's just so many bad vibes around the Rams.
He was injured in the preseason as well.
Injured in the preseason, and also it's the type of thing where I don't think that team's going to be in playoff contention. So if he's got a little niggling ankle injury and they're in the mix for a top 5 pick, then maybe he just doesn't play the last few weeks, which could be the fantasy playoffs. So I don't know. I think if you can guarantee me 17 games of Cooper Kupp, then I think he might be the #1 player in fantasy, just about, and certainly in that range. But I don't know. It's awkward hitting submit on the Kupp button.
I have him at wide receiver 3. To your point, I mean, this is somebody who last year, even in a limited time, right? He missed games. He scored more points than DJ Moore, Deontay Johnson, and Juju Smith-Schuster, who all played 16 or more games. His 8 full games last year, a 33% target share. He had over 25 fantasy points in 5 of those 8 games. And to your point, I mean, it's still going to be a passing offense under Sean McVay. Matthew Stafford didn't come back to hand the ball off, and he's all they got. So I mean, again, we talk about massive target share for guys like Devontae Adams, for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Cooper Kupp is going to get, a 30% target share, if not more. And so I think the talent, because of the age thing, I have Jefferson and Chase, who I think are safer ahead of him. But yeah, I love Kupp this year, and I do think he's not getting talked about nearly enough. I like, Connor, the fact that Jay is expressing injury concern on Cooper Kupp, but was defending Michael Thomas for months and months and months and months.
Well done,
on
Jay.
the other side,
pick
now.
your spot.
Yeah. I'm a hater.
Yeah,
Can guard Mike.
Unbelievable.
All right, let's look at tier 2, because we briefly touched on tier 2 here. Obviously, plenty of options in this tier that also could be round 1 picks, as Barry said. Ride or die, Amon-Ra St. Brown is there, but Monte Adams, CD Lamb. I mean, this is a beefy tier here, Jay, loaded with talent. Who would you say sits in this tier that you think comfortably could finish the season and you look at and go, man, that guy should have been a tier 1 player?
I think people are sleeping a little bit on Devontae Adams, and I realize that he has the injury concern as well, but he finished last year as wide receiver 3. And it's not like he had an amazing quarterback situation. Derek Carr didn't have a great year. And I think just, again, on that team, it's not quite to the same extent as Cooper Kupp on the Rams, but, I mean, he's all they've got, really, in terms of elite passing option. Darren Waller no longer there either, and just with the sheer amount of targets and the talent and the touchdown equity, I wouldn't be surprised if Devontae Adams replicates last season.
It's interesting. When you were saying Devontae Adams, I thought where you were going to go was Devontae Smith. And I think he's really interesting. A lot of these guys, we've talked about St. Brown, obviously, a ton. Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave. We've talked about all those guys, A.J. Brown as well. But 2 guys at the end of this tier, T. Higgins and Devontae Smith, we haven't talked about that much. And Smith, I think, is fascinating to me. Starting in he just had a bad week 1 last year, for whatever reason. He didn't show up really in week 1. But starting in week 2 last year, from that point forward, he's the 12th best wide receiver in fantasy football. He had a 27% target share, on one of the run-heaviest teams in the NFL. And we expect, because the Eagles' schedule is much harder this year, we expect defenses to have, defense coordinators are all like, okay, how do we prepare for Jalen Hurts? They weren't really prepared that much last year. So my expectation is that the games are going to be more competitive for the Eagles this year, so they're going to have to throw more. I mean, they were running so much in the second half last year because they were just up. They were just killing teams. So I think Smith is really interesting. I have him at wide receiver 14, but you could easily see him sneak into the top 10, if not more so.
I mean, he finished last year as wide receiver 9, which I think goes a little bit under the radar because of the year that Hurts had. A.J. Brown had a better season as well, but I mean, he was a top 10 wide receiver on a team that basically never had to throw the ball in the second half. So yeah, he could have a massive season.
On a points per game basis, wide receiver 9?
No, just wide receiver 9 overall.
Oh, really?
PPR,
okay,
yeah, that's what I've got.
Okay,
yeah.
My scoring is slightly different, but whatever. Either way, he's very good. This much, but we agree that he's very good.
Let's dive into tier 3, because now you get into the conversation, guys. Say you start out your draft and you're like, I have to have Austin Eckler or Christian McCaffrey, and then there's another running back or even a quarterback you like in round 2. How long, Barry, can you realistically wait before you take that first wide receiver for your team? And is that cutoff somewhere in this group of tier 3?
It's not. I would be nervous having one of these guys in tier 3 as my wide receiver 1. I think you want, at least, especially given the depth of running back, which we talked about on yesterday's show, the depth at quarterback that we've talked about, where those guys go, I think it's important that you have at least a tier 1 or tier 2 wide receiver as your wide receiver 1. So and even I'd be a little nervous with T. Higgins or Smith as my wide receiver 1. I think they're great wide receiver 2. So this list here, tier 3, as we look at it, Keenan Allen, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Calvin Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, and Amari Cooper. Very solid tier 3, but I don't think I'd feel comfortable with any of these guys as my wide receiver 1. They all have question marks, right? I mean, is this the Keenan Allen, is this the year that Mike Williams overtakes him, right? DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett was better than him last year, right? I mean, So, and what does JSN do that offense as well? Debo, we've talked a lot about Ayuk. You know, Calvin Ridley, we love Calvin Ridley, but he's been out of football for quite some time. And so there's just, as you go down that list, there's just, you know, question marks here. Amari Cooper, tons of questions, obviously, about Deshaun Watson, wide range of outcomes for what he does here. But I'll talk about Ridley here for a second here. He's had 34 career games where he's gotten at least 6 targets. He averages 18.7 fantasy points per game. I think we all agree Trevor Lawrence is going to take a step forward this year after a very good year last year. But, you know, it's going to be a pass-first offense. They went out, they got him. The training camp reports are off the charts. The buzz is palpable. But my question for you guys is like, we haven't seen this guy play, and the last time we saw him play, he was crushing for a very bad Falcons team where he was really the only guy. And now he comes to a team where there's a lot of mouths to feed. How comfortable are you guys with Ridley as your wide receiver 2?
I think wide receiver 2, so long as you've gotten one of the elite guys before him, is fine. But he probably has the widest range of outcomes of any wide receiver, I can imagine. Because, I mean, he could be a top 7 wide receiver this season. And he also might just not be any good anymore because we haven't seen him in so long. So I think Ridley is very high variance. Another guy I think is hugely high variance is Deebo Samuel, who is going a little bit under the radar. In 2021, which is only 2 years ago, Deebo was wide receiver 3, and he missed time and also played hurt towards the end of the season. And I think on talent, he's, to me, clearly a top 10 wide receiver in the sport. And it's just all about, well, how much are Kittle and Ayuk and McCaffrey to an extent, how much are they going to take away from him? But because he has, I mean, he has the upside to be a top 5 wide receiver.
Right, and the other thing, though, and McCaffrey's the biggest key there, because a lot of what fueled that wide receiver 3 season was he was getting rushing attempts.
Yep.
Like they were using him in the goal line. Like they were, you know, they were doing right, exactly. So that's the fact is so a lot of the versatility that Deebo brought, they now have with McCaffrey. And do they want to just say, okay, you know, we don't want to put that wear and tear on you, and we'll do it maybe once a game, twice a game, something like that. But the usage that we saw 2 years ago, and even somewhat of the first half of last year, candidly before they got McCaffrey, how much did that continue, Connor?
I think you wonder, there's an element here where the Niners obviously always in contention, a lot of talent. It feels like almost load management with Deebo could be a very real thing. I mean, there's going to be weeks where, hey, we got to have this game. We're going to be force-feeding Deebo. But I feel like there's also weeks where they really will sit back and be like, we don't want to put a lot of snap count on this guy. And in fantasy, that scares you. I mean, it scares you a lot where his ADP is right now. Yeah,
and that team is going to be, I think, extremely matchup dependent, where there are just going to be weeks where Deebo is kind of unsighted because the matchup is just better with Kittle or with Ayuk or with McCaffrey as a pass catcher out of the backfield. And I think it's just going to wax and wane, where Deebo is probably going to have a week where he ends as wide receiver 1 this season. But you just never know which week that's going to be.
Let's jump into Tier 4 because his teammate, Brandon Ayuk, sits in this tier. And Barry, he's a fascinating player to me because he's always had the top-notch talent, now looks to be really hitting his stride. And obviously the Niners, now that Brock Purdy's healthy, gives you probably a little bit more confidence for Ayuk's season as well.
He's going in the 9th round over on ESPN, and this is a guy who from week 6 on last year was a top 15 wide receiver in fantasy points per game. He tied for the team lead in red zone targets. Seems to be a connection with him and Brock Purdy as well. And so I think you can make an argument, as much as we all like Deebo Samuel, I think you can make a strong argument that Brandon Ayuk at cost is actually a better pick if you want to invest in the 49ers passing attack here. But there's a lot of great names here in this tier 4. Mike Williams, who I'm high on, who made the love-hate list, right? Then Christian Kirk, DJ Moore, Christian Watson, Drake London, Deontay Johnson, who has to be better, who absolutely has to be better than he was last year. I think that offense takes a step forward, as we talked about, and just positive regression. Chris Godwin comes in next. Terry McLaurin, my Commanders, Ayuk, and then Tyler Lockett. And honestly, I think I'm too low on Tyler Lockett, guys. I'm too low on Tyler Lockett. I need to change that.
The forever slept on Tyler Lockett. It's truly amazing.
And you know, I mean, Godwin, I think will be, you know, like Baker Mayfield will be able to get the ball to Chris Godwin. Jarvis Landry had a number of productive fantasy seasons with Baker Mayfield as quarterback.
Yep, I like that. Connor, who do you like more this year, Christian Watson or Drake London?
Honestly, it might be Drake London just because of the fact that he had nothing with Mariota last year, and you see the talent when they finally kind of ripped the cord out of that one. This guy was the 8th overall pick in the draft. I think Christian Watson is an explosive player, but I think he's still a little bit raw in contested catch situations down the field. That's London's calling card, and this isn't about Christian Watson versus Drake London either or, right, as the player. It's about the situation. Drake London has to be the guy getting the targets in the offense, an offense that we're already concerned about Kyle Pitts' involvement. It's about Drake London in that offense.
It's so weird. I agree with you in that it's not about necessarily the talent versus the talent. It's about opportunity. But I actually argue that Watson has the better opportunity.
So you like Jordan Love?
Well, just it's not that I like Jordan Love. I think Jordan Love will be. I think the worst case for Jordan Love is Desmond Ridder. Like I think there's a chance Jordan Love is good.
That's fair.
But so I think at worst it's even. And at best, I think Watson will have the better quarterback. I think it'll be a more aggressive offense in Green Bay. They'll pass it more than Atlanta wants to. And actually, I'd rather, if I'm, when I look around target competition, like I'd rather have a guy that only has Romeo Doubs and Jaden Reed and Luke Musgrave. So you got two rookies and a fourth round pick who was inconsistent last year versus Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson. Right, I mean that's who Drake London's got to compete with for touches in that offense. So I just actually think Watson's got less. I think he's potentially got a better quarterback situation. I think he's got a more aggressive offense, and I think he's got less target competition.
Yep.
Would be my take.
I think Drake London is probably a little bit just better than Christian
Right,
Watson, potentially, but
and I'm not debating that piece.
Right.
But the thing with Christian Watson that was really interesting to me last year is that he got targeted a ton in the red zone, which I didn't really expect out of his player profile, but he had 14 targets in the red zone. The only guy in the Packers who had more was Alan Lazard, who's not there anymore. So just Rodgers using him as a red zone weapon was really interesting, and if Jordan Love is going to use him in the same way, then all of a sudden he has a lot more upside.
Let's jump into Tier 5. And, Jay, I want to ask you this. All the talent we've gone throughout these tiers, are you comfortable going into a draft and just starting by taking 3 or 4 wide receivers in a row? I mean, obviously we're talking zero RB approach here, but with this level of talent, where's your comfort level with that strategy? Yeah,
I think when you get further down the running backs, there are more guys that I like going with a zero RB approach. Guys, I mean, if Najee Harris is slipping to the 5th round, or you can end up with Cam Akers or Dameon Pierce at value, I kind of like that more than the guys in this range on the wide receiver front. At the same time, I do think there are a couple of guys in this range who are being undervalued a little bit. Marquise Brown, for instance, is going to get a ton of targets in Arizona. Michael Pittman, likewise in Indianapolis. And I think too often we worry about the situation and the quarterback, but if they're just going to be pumped with targets, it overcomes a lot of that. And then a guy who I think is just being drafted way too late is Gabe Davis, who was going as wide receiver 25 last season. He's fallen out of the top 35 this season, basically because he was hurt last year.
I'll piggyback off that, Jay, and say George Pickens is my guy in that mold. He's going too late. Kenny Pickett loves him. There's a connection there. He fits Pickett's play style. This guy was a round 1 talent that fell to round 2 because of a lot of different circumstances at Georgia. I think Pickens is the guy at the end of the year. We'll sit here and wonder, how did Jordan Addison and Jerry Jeudy get drafted ahead of him? Yeah,
you know what? I like that. I like that call. I'm in on Pickens. I'm in on Davis. Honestly, I really like this entire tier, and this is, to me, this is a tier. If we can bring that tier back up, if you just bring that graphic up quickly for one more second, read through it, but just like Hollywood Brown, Jerry Jeudy, Mike Evans, Michael Pittman, Jordan Addison, Jahan Dotson, Cortland Sutton, Gabe Davis, George Pickens, Brandon Cooks, JSN, and Jacoby Myers. Like all these guys, like if you enter your draft, you get an elite wide receiver, you get your quarterback, 1 or 2, then you're doing running backs for a little bit, and then you're coming back around. These are all like 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th round guys for the most part. I mean, Jacoby Myers is going to the 13th, but these are guys that I think are really interesting. You mentioned Marquise Brown. One guy that we haven't talked about at all, and I think is very underrated, is Michael Pittman. Like, Michael Pittman's a good wide receiver, and I get it. He was bad last year for where he was drafted, right? I mean, like, again, he had only 2 games with over 20 fantasy points. The Colts were a disaster last year. And I get it that Anthony Richardson is still developing as a passer. But Michael Pittman had a 25% target share. And again, you talk about situations where he's the only guy. Like, while we think Anthony Richardson will be raw as a passer and make some mistakes, like, he's not going to be worse than Sam Ehlinger was last year. He's not going to be worse than Matt Ryan was last year. Like, there's going to be some mistakes from Richardson, but they're going to throw. They are going to throw. That's the thing about Richardson, is because of his athleticism, people think he's just going to be like, you remember Lamar Jackson's rookie year where all he did was run. Literally, like, they never even let him pass his rookie year.
They think he's Justin Fields.
That's
honestly.
Right.
That's what people are thinking, and I think that's totally off base.
Correct. Talk about this. Like, he's more of a pocket passer than people realize.
He wanted to throw in college. There were instances where he would actually stay in the pocket or try to recreate the pocket so much longer than he had to. And I remember Sims and I were joking about this. He's such a freak. It's like, just take off. You're in the SEC. Just take off and run for 80 yards because you're bigger and faster and stronger than everyone. In the NFL, I think that actually helps him translate better because there are a lot of times where you're not going to beat the linebacker to the sideline. And I think he has the right coaching to know when to hang in and throw and when to not. And that helps Michael Pittman because he's the guy working back to the ball when the play breaks down.
Yep. And last year, I mean, with everything going wrong around him, Michael Pittman still had 141 targets last year. And then the year before, Jonathan Taylor, they were feeding him. He was having one of the greatest seasons of all time. Frank Reich, by the end of the year, had no confidence whatsoever in Carson Wentz. And Michael Pittman still had 129 targets and finished as a top 20 wide receiver. So, yeah, I think he's hugely underrated.
Yeah, I just, like this is a guy that was like going as as a top 15 wide receiver last year as we see him score a touchdown here against the Texans because, everyone scores against the Texans. No, it was the Jets. Oh, it was your Jets.
No one scores against my Jets.
There you go. Look at this. But, just, again, the separation that he gets, I don't know. Michael Pittman is somebody that I think in this range is really interesting. That, again, Marquise Brown, again, bad teams, but somebody that's going to get massive volume. And they're professional quarterbacks. Whatever it is. Whatever you think of Richardson as a passer this year, whatever you think of, Josh Dobbs or Clayton Tune or whoever ends up starting for the Cardinals.
The big secret, by the way.
Yeah.
Competitive advantage.
Yeah, whatever. Love my Commanders in week 1, by the way, at home against whoever that is. Yeah. By the way, sneaky defense pick up there in week 1. I just think they're really talented players. I'm in a guillotine league. Literally the other night I did a 17-team guillotine league. So if people are very quickly, a guillotine league is you draft like you normally do, and you start a lineup. You don't play head to head, but at the end of on Tuesday morning, after all the games have been played, whatever team is the lowest scoring team gets cut from the league forever, and all their players go back into the free agent pool. And you just keep doing that until there's only one team remaining. So that's why it's 17 teams, because you got 18 weeks, right? You keep doing that. So in that league, you want nothing but floor. Yep. And so I've drafted Michael Pittman in that league. That's why I'm bringing it up, because that's a floor guy. I drafted Marquise Brown as well in that league. It's a 17-team league. You know what I mean? But you want floor guys, right? Here's my other big piece of advice: anyone doing a guillotine league, especially one that deep. You want an advantage at tight end. That's where you can't take a 0 at tight end. There's so few good tight ends in the league. That's where you can't take a 0 because, again, one bad week and you're chopped. Yep. But it's a great fun. By the way, if you've never played a guillotine league, I would highly recommend it. You can go to guillotineleagues.com if you want to play it. That's where they do this format. And anyway, we should do one here for the happy hour staff.
Yeah, let's do it.
It's really fun. It's a really fun format.
Last thing on Michael Pittman. He's only 25 years old, and he was picked 34 in 2020. It feels like he's 29.
I know.
He just doesn't. He's 25, so he also has just upside to just get better.
As we jump into our last tier for today, tier 6, this is where we kind of talk late round flyers, late round targets here. Barry, who are some guys on this list that's kicked off by Quentin Johnson? This is a very, very long list, but kicked off by the likes of Quentin Johnson. A lot of young players that have yet to break out, and some old players that are trying to hold on to their careers as well.
I'll mention a couple of guys real quickly. A lot of guys on this list, right? And just to read through them for people that are listening. But Johnston, Bateman, Treylon Burks, Zay Flowers, Michael Thomas, Jay, Sky Moore, Zay Jones, Tyler Boyd, Juju Smith-Schuster, Elijah Moore, Kadarius Toney, Alan Lazard, Nico Collins, Romeo Dobbs, Marvin Mims, Rasheed Rice, Darnell Mooney, KJ Osborne. Rashad Bateman, I've talked about him. I think everyone's talking about Zay Flowers and OBJ. I actually think Bateman, who had a 24% target share from Lamar Jackson last year, I think has a chance to be that guy. He earns targets. It's all small sample size, but I do think people are sleeping on Bateman a little bit. Sky Moore, we've talked about, played in the preseason week 2, played 100% of the snaps with Patrick Mahomes. He had only 3 games last year where he ran 15 or more routes, but he got 6 targets in 2 of those 3 games. He earns targets. I do know that they like Sky Moore quite a bit in Kansas City, especially with Kadarius Toney banged up. And then Marvin Mims. Again, we've talked about this. Sean Payton went to Denver, and he knew he had Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Tim Patrick, and Greg Dulcich, and still went out and spent a second-round pick on Marvin Mims. And now, obviously, Hamler, Patrick are out for the year. Jerry Jeudy is banged up. I like Marvin Mims quite a bit this year.
Yep. Connor, what do you think of Romeo Doubs this year? Because last year, this time, he was getting all the hype in the world. It's like, oh, is he going to be the wide receiver 1 on the Packers? And then it just never really happened. It seemed like he had some drop issues. Like, what can we expect from him this year?
Yeah, the drops and also the health, a big thing. I mean, this is somebody coming out of Nevada, was very raw, but also a great deep threat for that offense. And I think he projects perfectly as a number 3 in a solid offense, but was kind of amplified into a bigger role than he was ready for. So it's all about staying healthy with him. It feels like
a lot of people say that about Connor too, by the way.
Yes.
Amplified into a bigger role than he was ready for. But it's all right. It's good. But here you are.
Here I am, Romeo Doubs of Happy Hour.
Great health from Connor, though. Great health.
Great health.
I'm here every day.
Health. Yeah. Great hair. You're here every day.
15 minutes early.
Quality wardrobe.
Yes.
Yeah, you're punctual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really good.
High floor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Really good at avoids hits like Tyler Lockett.
Yeah.
That's right.
Avoids hits. Yeah, gym
good
rat.
Scouting report.
Gym rat.
There we
You're constantly working out. Yeah,
maybe
exactly.
sneaky athletic. We don't know.
Yeah,
very
exactly.
sneaky.
High character as well.
Yeah,
Thank you. Wow.
Good locker room guy.
Yeah,
He's a good locker room guy. That's what
I'm
he
already
is.
on the Patriots. Yeah. Do that. It's amazing how that works out. All right, Jay, you know what time it is. As we do with the primers, we do a little betting preview mixed in with these. It's a nice way to kind of look at the lay of the land and what the markets expect. So most regular season receiving yards is where we kick this thing off. There is no surprise who the top 2 guys are. Justin Jefferson at plus 550, Jamar Chase at plus 600. And then it kind of opens up from there, Jay. So how do you evaluate this market from the top and maybe something off the board?
Yeah. So, guys, Michael Thomas is 60 to 1. No, I'm kidding. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I know I don't want to suck up to Matthew, but he's 35 to 1, which to me is a little bit too long. I mean, he's so long that he's not even on the board. Like, Amon-Ra St. Brown has more upside, I think, than guys like A.J. Brown to lead the league in passing yards as the number 1 option on an elite offense. We've talked about it a lot, but his schedule is so friendly in terms of not having to play in the cold, which Jared Goff hates, in the back end of the season. Another long shot who I like, just because of the upside and the variance, Calvin Ridley's 50 to 1. Calvin Ridley, I think, has the scope and the talent where if it just clicks, he could potentially do that, but it's going to be pretty hard going past Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Cooper Kupp, and then Tyreek Hill, who was the front runner in this market for a lot of last season, plus 900, but I would look a bit further down the board at guys like Amon-Ra and Ridley.
I'm just going to say, I'm sitting there looking at Stephon Diggs at 20 to 1, right? I mean, like, we have yet to see like that magical, crazy season from Stephon Diggs. Like he's had flashes of it.
Every year it's just 1,400 yards, 10 touchdowns.
Very, very good.
Right.
Never the best.
Very. But I'm just saying, like the Bills haven't fully put it together yet, right? We keep waiting for and maybe this is the year that they all put it together. And like, I mean, Diggs has the talent and the quarterback and the scheme to be a 2,000-yard receiver. I'm not saying he's going to. Right. It's much more likely that he's in the 1,400-1,500 range. But like, if things go right, if Gabe Davis becomes a thing and suddenly starts drawing some talent, like again, like Stephon Diggs is somebody that, you know, has there are things in there that wouldn't be crazy for Stephon Diggs to lead the NFL in receiving yards, and 20 to 1 strikes me as a little bit too high.
100%. And I think like it doesn't make any sense to me that Jamar Chase is like 10 to 1 to win Offensive Player of the Year, and Stephon Diggs is like 40 to 1. Like that's too far apart for those guys. The only thing with Diggs and what gives me pause is just the weather in Buffalo in the second half of the season. And every year they just lose one game in terms of statistical production. A couple of years ago, it was the Patriots game and the crazy wind, which is like, oh, well, we just can't throw the ball at all. There's always a snow game. So that would be the one thing. But if he can just run good a little bit on the weather front, then he's absolutely got the talent to do that.
Let's jump into the receiving touchdowns leaders here. That has also led Jamar Chase is at the top of this one at plus 400. Travis Kelce gets a big bump in this range at plus 500, Jay, followed by Cooper Kupp, who's only at plus 550, and then after Kupp is when the board kind of begins to open up.
Yeah, so the big difference between this and the previous market is Travis Kelce, who just has so much more touchdown equity, but perhaps not the upside to actually lead the league in passing yards. The guy who's interesting to me among the favorites is Davante Adams is 14 to 1. Yeah. Davante Adams has had double-digit touchdowns 6 of the past 7 years. Obviously, a lot of that was with Aaron Rodgers, but he had 14 touchdowns last season, and I think the reason why he's so low here is just the thought that Jimmy Garoppolo is going to get injured at some point and then it drops off a lot. But I don't know. I think that he's just going to get pumped with targets, and I think that he is a guy who could do it. And then not even listed here is Tyreek Hill, who's 22 to 1. as well, where I think the Tyreek Hill, people think of him because he didn't have that many touchdowns last year, but he does have a 15 touchdown season on his resume. So I think he is a guy with upside to do this as well.
I'll tell you one guy that really jumps out to me on this list is, you talk about all the touchdowns that Davante Adams scored so many years. Well, because the guy that thrown to him was Aaron Rodgers. How about the guy Aaron Rodgers is going to throw to this year? That's Garrett Wilson, who's 22-1, plus 2,200 here. And just, I think that Rodgers, for a variety of reasons, one, because he's the best player on the team, but also because he wants to show the New York media, he also wants his own stats. How many times did you see the Packers come up to the 3-yard line? There's A.J. Dillon in the backfield, and you're like, oh, here we go up the middle, and then Aaron Rodgers just kind of looks over and
puts his arm up,
just whatever, and then Davante Adams runs a quick slant, and then boom, touchdown, 17. And I could see Garrett Wilson getting a lot of those cheap kind of touchdowns. If Aaron Rodgers wanted to make him his Davante Adams, he's already in the press, compared him to Davante Adams. There's a scenario where Garrett Wilson just has a monster season because Aaron Rodgers wants that to happen for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, there's some value with him at plus 2,200 because as Chase is the favorite, he plays an offense with T. Higgins, who's phenomenal in the red area. Same with A.J. Brown, who plays with Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. For the Jets, it's Garrett Wilson out of the pass catchers in the red area, and you even heard Rodgers go up to him after that touchdown against the Giants, and he said first of many. So he's been pretty vocal about what he thinks Garrett Wilson can do. All right, let's look at regular season receptions. No surprise that Cooper Kupp is at the top of this one, Jay, plus 500. Of course, Jamar Chase always hovering around along with Justin Jefferson, plus 600 and plus 650. And then once again, you get a board that starts to even out a little bit more.
Yeah, Kupp is deservedly the favorite. That is, there are other elements to it, but the biggest component of that is just him staying healthy. If he plays 17 games, then he is a big favorite to take that home. Again, Amon-Ra, 18-1.
I was just going to say,
too big for mine. C.D. Lamb as well, 20-1. C.D. Lamb was 3 receptions off being 4th last year. Yeah, 8s was 4 off. So I don't mind him either. But
Amon-Ra at 18-1, come on. Who are we kidding here?
Take offense to that? No.
I do take offense to that. I'm happy to it. I'm going to bet that. I'm going to bet that heavily.
Yeah. I like it.
He's going to get a massive target share.
Yeah.
And as you talked about, again, the thing you talked about with Diggs, we've talked about this a lot, but you talked about with Diggs towards the end of the season, having to deal with some bad weather, Amon-Ra won't have that. He will be indoors. 7 of their final 8 games are played in a dome. Lions are going to have a fun offense this year.
Yeah. With this market in particular, you need guys who are #1 wide receiver options who don't have another guy stealing from them. That's why I don't like Jamar Chase because of T. Higgins. You want guys like Cooper Kupp, like Amon-Ra St. Brown, like Davante Adams, guys who don't have that competition. I don't like Tyreek Hill in that market, even though he finished 2nd, just because Jalen Waddle's so good. And you're not going to be force-feeding like Stafford is to Kupp.
What are Chris Olave's odds?
He's 35-1 for both receiving yards and receptions, I believe. And he's a guy I like as well. But Connor, does he have the frame to really absorb that kind of workload? Because he's a bit smaller than
that. Was always the question with him, is how is he going to take contact in the middle of the field? You knew he can win off the line of scrimmage and down the field. You'd like to throw him more screens, but I think you do worry about that. And the thing with him, why I'm against him for yards, is he's not great after the catch. He's great, phenomenal before the catch. Right. He's not a big creator after the catch. So I would look for receptions with Olave, not yards.
Yep, 35-1.
There we go.
I like it.
All right, the final weekend of draft season is upon us, and what better way to spend it than with us? There are 2 fantasy football happy hour marathons this weekend, including a monster 16-hour marathon on Saturday, beginning at 12 p.m. Eastern Time on Peacock.
Watch all 16 hours. Prove to us that you've watched all 16 hours. Tweet at me, at Connor J. Rogers, at Croucher JD. Show us some sort of proof, whether it's a time lapse video, something like that. Prove to us that you've watched all 16 episodes. Maybe a screenshot of you in front of each episode, so we know that, we can, 16 frames or something like that. And you will drink free at the happy hour, and we will put your picture up somewhere here in the bar.
We're taking our first break. When we're back, the wide receiver primer continues with draft strategy.
And who are you taking with your second pick here? Your best receiver on the board, I take it?
You know what? Normally I take Davante Adams, but I'm representing Team Fantasy Life. Matthew Berry's ride or die. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Let's go.
Do you get a residual for that pick, by the way?
I wish, man. I wish.
Roto-World Draft Week is officially here all week long. We've got drafts, articles, and more from all your favorite Roto-World talent and special guests. Get all you need to dominate your upcoming fantasy drafts. Go to NBCSports.com/fantasy to see the schedule of all that is happening this week. Guys, before we get into more wide receiver talk, something that's been happening this morning while we've been recording is that Jeff Wilson Jr. of the Miami Dolphins has been placed on the short-term IR. He's dealing with a midsection injury plus a finger issue. So Wilson Jr. banged up. They felt like it was too much for him to get any work going into the season. That is from head coach Mike McDaniel. And I think the big question is, with Devon Achane expected to practice before week 1 and Raheem Mostert now being the guy, what kind of bump there is in that backfield?
Yeah, I think it's a big bump for Mostert. Raheem must start. Our friend of the podcast here, Savon Ahmed, suddenly has fantasy value here because, right, I mean, they released Myles Gaskin, and it also, by the way, explains the Jonathan Taylor interest, right? I mean, this explains the Jonathan. I mean, not that you need a reason to be interested in Jonathan Taylor if you're a team that's trying to win this year, but it explains that more so. And I still wouldn't completely rule that out. Again, it is a shame because Jeff Wilson Jr. is a great player, but health has always been an issue throughout his career. It strikes again, but I think Mostert is like now in that, you know, I'm sort of looking at my rankings here, and I think he's like I have A.J. Dillon at 36, Zach Charbonnet at 37, Jalen Warren at 38. Like, I think he's in that range, right? You know, I mean, Samaje Perine at 35. I think I still prefer Perine, but like, I think he's in that mid-tier, you know, in that mid-30s range of a guy that could be a starter. Like, let me put it this way. If you're drafting Jamal Williams, you should be drafting Raheem Mostert ahead of Jamal Williams. If you're like, well, I'm going to get 3 good games out of Jamal Williams before Kamara shows up, like, you could get even more. If Mostert, pardon the pun, but if Mostert takes this job and runs with it, even Wilson comes back, like, it's hard to see, you know, Mostert losing carries. Like, there'll still be somewhat of a committee, but, like, Mostert will be the head of it.
I mean, he was in a committee last year and he was RB 25. And the fact that he's going outside the top 45, he was already going too late in drafts, and now the fact that, I mean, he's been going out after Elijah Mitchell and Ezekiel Elliott and Damian Harris. Like, I already liked him more than those guys. And now he could produce, while Wilson is out, he could produce top 15 value.
The issue is Achane. That was, I think, the reason he's going so late is not just the injury history and Wilson there, but because because not only they used a 3rd-round pick on Devon Achane, but they moved up, right? They moved up to get him. Right, and I know Mike McDaniel, like said, he was standing on the table to draft Devon Achane.
That's his guy, and for Achane now, who dealt with the shoulder injury this summer, I think it's a little bit of a surprise that he's going to be able to practice before week 1, which makes it a little bit more complicated, but there's absolutely value on Mostert. When we did the running back primer a couple of days ago, Jeff Wilson was going 20 spots ahead of Raheem Mostert. So with a lot of Labor Day weekend drafts, that's bound to change. Let's jump back into the wide receivers here, and I think the conversation here, Barry, as we talk draft strategy, kind of starts simple. I mean, which wide receivers have the most questions or concerns? And this can be clearly based on cost, because you could sit here and talk about a wide receiver in tier 6, and of course they have questions, but maybe some guys towards the top or in the middle that you look at and go, man, there is some risk where he's going off the board.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about some of these guys, right? I mean, Drake London is one of them, right? You know, is there going to be enough passing volume for Drake London, you know, in that offense, especially now that Bijan's there and we expect him to be involved in the passing game? Mike Evans, you know, like, is Mike Evans is he going to get enough passing volume, and, you know, is Baker going to be able to get him the ball, right? I mean, I'm in on Michael Pittman, but he's certainly somebody that you have a question mark about Michael Pittman. Cooper Kupp, right? And we just talked about that. Can he stay healthy, right?
Can his quarterback.
Right, can his quarterback stay healthy as well? Again, like I would have no concerns about Cooper Kupp if he hadn't gotten injured this preseason. But then he gets injured with this preseason. Like, you know, I think there's, you know,
Calvin Ridley.
You know, Calvin Ridley's massive questions about him. Like, again, we just haven't seen the guy. Like, honestly, and I think you could argue somewhat on Amari Cooper because we just don't know with Deshaun Watson. Like, you know, I mean, the questions isn't necessarily Cooper's talent, but it's about his quarterback. If Deshaun Watson is the Deshaun Watson from the last 5 games of last year, like, you feel a lot worse about Amari Cooper this season.
Yep.
What about you, Jay? Anybody stick out that you kind of go, hey, I just don't like him at that ADP because of the quarterback or because of the health concerns or maybe even just the offense?
One guy who I think me and Matthew are on opposite sides on is I'm a little bit worried about DeAndre Hopkins. And it's not like he's going super high, but just between, he's older, he's on a new team, that offensive line is a mess. And I wouldn't be shocked if Will Levis or Malik Willis is in there at some point, just because Tannehill gets hurt, it seems like every year, and he's behind the worst offensive line in football, arguably. And also, obviously, Derrick Henry is going to get a ton of work. So I don't feel great about DeAndre Hopkins just with all those things swirling. But Ridley, to me, is a really interesting one because last time he was fully fit, he was wide receiver 5. That was also in 2020. Which is 3 years ago by my math. So he is someone who he has been rocketing up draft boards in terms of ADP all off season. I think now we're at the point where I don't think he's a value where he's going as wide receiver 16, going in the mid 30s. I think it's probably, I don't think that's absurdly overvalued, but I'm not coming out of many drafts with Calvin Ridley at this point.
Yeah, to me the two other questions aren't necessarily player based, but really like sort of who is the guy based, which is like, we know there's going to be a very good fantasy wide receiver on Baltimore. We're just not sure who it's going to be. We know there's going to be a really good fantasy wide receiver in Kansas City. We're just not sure who it's going to be. Like, I think it's going to be Sky Moore, and I've said I'm placing my bets with Rashad Bateman in Baltimore, but like, it wouldn't shock me if the leading receiver there is Beckham or Zay Flowers, or in Kansas City if it's MVS or Rashee Rice or Kadarius Toney. Like, there's obviously it's going to be Kelsey, but like, there will be a productive fantasy wide receiver on the Chiefs offense, on the Ravens offense, and we're just not sure who those guys are. And then also same with Seattle on some level. Like we like Lockett, we think he's underrated. Metcalf is Metcalf, but what does JSN do to that offense? And so I think there's some questions there as well.
Last one I'll say is Pittsburgh, where we're all projecting a leap forward from Kenny Pickett and that he will be able to support Deontay Johnson and George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth all being fantasy viable, but like we still have to see it from Kenny Pickett because even though he showed a lot of good signs towards the end of last year, it's not like he was putting up absurd volume. He wasn't passing for 350 yards a game or anything like that. That's a projection forward based on how young he is and what he's shown, but we still haven't seen it yet.
Let's look at the top 10 from last year, the top 10 for PPR, as we always get into some scoring rankings as well. And with running backs, we discussed how much there could be a little bit of a difference with half PPR and PPR. With wide receivers, guys, these are the top 10 that finished for PPR. It's the same top 10 for half PPR, and 6 of the players remained in the same spot. So, Barry, even with the scoring change, not a massive difference of the names that appear at the top.
No, just so people that are listening and can't see, the graphic that we're showing here on the NFL and NBC YouTube channel or on Peacock, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams was 3, Stephon Diggs was 4, CeeDee Lamb was 5, A.J. Brown 6, Amon-Ra St. Brown 7, Jalen Waddle 8, Devontae Smith is 9. Jay Croucher, you were right, I was wrong, and Amari Cooper was 10th. This is total points.
And now we jump to half PPR here. And Justin Jefferson leads the way, followed by Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs. A.J. Brown was at 5, CeeDee Lamb at 6, Jalen Waddle at 7, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Mr. Ride or Die at 8, Devontae Smith stays at 9, and Amari Cooper at 10.
To me, what jumps out the most there is just the year that Jalen Waddle had, which I think got completely overshadowed by Tyreek Hill being such a supernova. But Jalen Waddle, 7th in half PPR, 8th in PPR, and he's also just so young. Tyreek Hill is older, and so there's more scope, I think, for Jalen Waddle to make improvements. Also, Tyreek really burnt down towards the end of the year. He's playing banged up. He wasn't the same guy the last month. I think there is a decent chance that Jalen Waddle outperforms Tyreek Hill. Certainly wouldn't make that the favorite, but that's on the cards.
Which kind of transitions us to the next topic of drafting 2 wide receivers on the same team. Obviously something that is not going to be popular in drafts, Jay. And there are teams where you have guys that are supported, right? And as we show the highest drafted wide receiver teammates, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, no surprise there. Chase as wide receiver 2, T. Higgins as wide receiver 13. Hill and Waddle, we know what those 2 guys are capable of. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Keenan Allen and Mike Williams that now have Quentin Johnston in that wide receiver room as well, the first-round rookie. And then Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. So those are the most popular top 5 pairings. Barry, is it almost taboo to draft, 2 wide receivers in the same room in most drafts, or sometimes does the value just force you into it?
Yeah, I don't. Now, this is for a single season, home leagues, right? Like if you're in a large best ball tournament or something like that, then you want, or just some sort of large format where you want variance, where you have to try to, then you try to stack those players and try to do a kind of a weird or unique roster build. But in this particular case, no, I'm not actively trying to get guys from the same team. Having said that, I'm also not avoiding it. Like, we do think Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are going to have good years. We do think Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. We do think, Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. So, like, if the draft falls to me where I'm drafting both those guys, like, yeah, sure. Like, they don't know they don't know that they're both on your fantasy team. Like, A.J. Brown's going to have a good year. Devontae Smith's going to have a good year. No issue if they're both on your team. Again, you just have to be a little bit wary of buys, and what it does is it increases risk on both sides, right? It increases reward because in games in which the Eagles are killing people, right, then both guys are going to go off, right, which is awesome. And then if there's a game where it's just like not their day, then you're getting 2 zeros or 2 low scores. So it does tie it a little bit together. There's a little bit less variance, if you will, but I'm okay with it. Again, like, they don't know that they're on your fantasy team. Draft good players. If they happen to be on the same NFL team, they happen to be on the same NFL team.
I think it depends most on the quarterback. Joe Burrow can clearly support 2 elite fantasy wide receivers. Justin Herbert, I think, has shown that he could do that 2021 in 5,000 passing yards. Tua Tagovailoa did it last year when he was playing, and that team throws the ball so much and they're so explosive that he can probably do it again. But you want faith in the offense, you want faith in the scheme.
By the way, and that speaks to, as we were talking earlier in the show about Gabe Davis, right?
Yep.
Josh Allen, we believe Josh Allen has that ability to do that, right? So Josh Allen does have the ability.
Jalen Hurts does too.
Yeah. Apparently so does Brock Purdy. Like, we're believing in Debo and Ayuk. We are. It's more about Kyle Shanahan's offense, but whatever.
We're hoping Kenny Pickett could do it. I mean, they're not elite wide receivers, but they are draft-worthy wide receivers.
Sam Howell's going to do it.
Another example.
Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson.
Yeah.
Come on. At cost, Jay.
Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, we love Sam Howell. Yeah.
Come on.
QB 8.
At cost, Sam Howell, Jahan Dotson, Terry McLaurin, all value picks this year. Hail the Commanders, hail victory.
Barry, you kind of touched on this
Yes,
with it obviously being best ball strategy, but in redraft leagues, obviously handcuffs are very popular at the running back position, but does it exist at wide receiver, especially when there might be a promising rookie that just is pushed down the depth chart, or is that not too common at this position?
It's not nearly as common that there's kind of an insurance player that you can draft for your elite guy. And it's only in super rare cases, right? You're likely better to go get somebody else than, but right, here's my thing. If I drafted Keenan Allen or Mike Williams, I'm not necessarily drafting Josh Palmer, even though last year we knew that when either one of those guys was out, Josh Palmer was great. Because you need, you know what I mean? Like, if you have Keenan Allen and then Mike Williams is out, Josh Palmer doesn't do you any good, right? I mean, or I guess he does because now he's viable because Mike Williams is out, and you could start both those guys. But I don't know. There's a few situations where you know that there's a backup wide receiver that will get more run if somebody in front of them goes down, right? But generally speaking, I think your wide receiver is so deep, and there's these guys. I would rather take a flyer on a rookie that'll explode in the second half, or somebody that just needs, an opportunity.
Yeah, I think what the wide receiver position and the wide receiver depth chart is more convoluted as well, where it's not just like for like. Often it depends on matchups. An X receiver goes down. A new X receiver is just going to come in and take all of the work from Jamar Chase. No, not necessarily. The offense will change as well, as opposed to if Travis Etienne goes down, then Tank Bigsby is going to be the guy immediately. So running back is a lot simpler in that regard.
Yeah. We're going to take our last break. When we're back, it's last call. We might have let the people decide who Barry's going to root for in the Big Ten. No promises, but he will decide when we're back. The people have spoken, Matthew. They want you to be a fan of the Iowa Hawkeyes.
Yeah, well,
now you have to be a fan of the Iowa Hawkeyes.
No, that's one piece of input. The Iowa, what happened is that Iowa, the official team account, they retweeted it. So we appreciate the engagement from Iowa. So that's why the polls are so skewed. But then Penn State, is this even a fair debate? # we are. And that's, Penn State Blake, obviously, he's doing my research. If I don't pick Penn State, maybe I got a bunch of wrong stats.
Good point. SVP chimed in.
Yeah. So my former colleague and my friend Scott Van Pelt tweets me and says, plenty of room for you on the Terp train. I know a guy at RJ Bentleys and can sort you out there. The others are too easy. We will make it painful, but the joy will be that much sweeter. Think it over. That's SVP coming in. So I've thought about it. Here's the thing, and thought about it. No one tweeted at me from Michigan, so they're off. We're not doing Michigan.
It's tough.
Yeah, so there was no convincing. Michigan's also too good.
Sure, they're the favorite.
And it's in the same state as East Lansing. So again,
you might not even be allowed.
We've got to do that.
Border there.
I appreciate the efforts of the Penn State, team there and of Blake, but no, I don't like the hat, to be honest with you.
They have other logos.
Yeah, they have other logos, but I'm not there. So now it's Iowa or Maryland. I will say this, I lived in Virginia until I was 12 years old. That's why I'm a Commanders fan. I'm a diehard fan of the state's teams, and my kids' lacrosse team won the state title this year, as you guys know, Cheshire Lacrosse. And one of our plays that was constantly called out was Turtle. That was just, the coach would call it all these plays. So Turtle became a running joke among all the parents because when we would call that particular play. So I have to go with the Terps. I'm sorry, fans. I appreciate the input. But ultimately, I am a lifelong diehard fan of the Maryland Terrapins. Go Terps. Someone get me a crab cake. I'm in. Go Maryland. Scott Van Pelt convinced me. Let's go.
Perfect time.
Hail the Terps.
Yeah,
Hail victory.
Good news, they're only 80-1 to win the Big Ten this year.
So
you're a
telling me there's a chance.
Exactly.
Tell me there's a chance. It is what it is. You know what? Like anyone could. Like I know you would have picked Ohio State.
I picked Michigan.
Front runner.
I picked Michigan.
Yeah, there you go.
I like the plucky underdog. That's why I'm a Yankees fan and a Michigan fan.
We'll save this for Penn State, Blake. You want an Iowa hat?
Yeah, you know what? They campaign so hard. They campaign so hard.
We love Iowa here. This is a pro Iowa set. We actually like all these schools. We're thrilled for the Big Ten. We're excited for Big Ten football on NBC and Peacock. I understand our own Jay Crouch will be doing some stuff with the Big Ten, right?
That's right.
Yep, doing the pregame show.
Doing the pregame, getting your pregame bets in with our friend Jay Crouch over there.
And this was perfect timing. Tomorrow is the 19th annual College Colors Day. Wear your team colors and share photos with the hashtag College Colors Day, and head to collegecolorsday.com for a chance to win tickets to this year's national title game.
There you go.
So you can support your team. I know the Iowa fans wanted maybe more celebrity, but they got me.
They got you. You got Connor Rogers.
Yeah, not bad.
But by the way, that's the other thing. I
But
believe that the only famous Maryland alum / fan is Scott Van Pelt. So I could be number 2. I think I'm officially the second most famous Maryland Terrapin fan.
It's very interesting. Yeah.
Am I wrong?
We
Someone
can
tweeted me.
that.
Who's more famous than me that's a Terps fan? Van Pelt is 100%. I'm second to Van Pelt.
DiCaprio? No, I don't know.
DiCaprio's not a fan. All right, it's closing time. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. For Jay and Connor, I'm Matthew. Go Terps! Go Terps! Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBC Sports and RotoWorld.com. Just want to thank you so much for watching what you just watched, or at least being too lazy to click out of it after the autoplay just kept it going. So either way, thank you so much for just letting it scroll by your screen. And now I'd like to ask you respectfully, please subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel for the latest NFL news, fantasy headlines from RotoWorld, and betting analysis from NBC Sports Edge.